These players put fear in their opponents' hearts not because of their skill or the number of goals they were scoring, but because of their sheer physical strength and willingness to throw punches at any given moment. This is a list of players that nobody wanted to mess with. The scariest NHL enforcers of the 1970s. There were plenty of NHL players who could fight, but only one holds the all-time single-season penalty record that will never be broken. Dave the Hammer Schultz. A 6'1", 190 left-winger who played for the Philadelphia Flyers, he was the most feared enforcer in hockey history. In the 1974-75 season, Schultz racked up an unbelievable 472 penalty minutes, a record that still stands today and probably will forever. He spent more time in the penalty box than some players spent on the ice. The whole league knew not to mess with the Flyers because of Schultz. One player said of him, "You didn't want to see the hammer coming at you. That's a fight you're going to lose." Schultz wasn't just fighting, he was sending messages. He protected his teammates like they were his family, and if you touched a Flyer, you had to answer to Dave. The Broad Street Bullies won 2 Stanley Cups in 1974 and 1975, and a huge reason was because nobody wanted to play physical against them. They were too scared of what Schultz would do. Stan Jonathan. Stan Jonathan was listed at 5'8" and 165 pounds, but his nickname, Little Chief, says everything you need to know. During his career with the Boston Bruins, Jonathan was fighting everybody, forwards, defensemen, opponents, teammates, and anyone who dared challenge him. Despite his small size, Stan had the heart of a lion and fists made of concrete. He never backed down from anyone, no matter how big they were. In 1978, Jonathan got into a heated fight with Pierre Bouchard of the Montreal Canadiens, who was 6'2" and outweighed him by 40 pounds. Stan didn't care about the size difference. He beat Bouchard so badly that the Canadiens player needed medical attention and was bleeding all over the ice. But Little Chief didn't stop there. That same season, he wanted to fight his own teammate Terry O'Reilly during practice because Terry accidentally hit him too hard during a drill. Stan wanted to go so bad that he ended up pushing 2 of his teammates who tried to calm him down. The most famous fight of Jonathan's career came in the 1978 playoffs against the New York Rangers. Stan squared up against Nick Fotiu, another tough guy who was 3 inches taller and 25 pounds heavier. Jonathan landed punch after punch, dropping Fotiu to the ice and earning the respect of everyone watching. Even the Rangers fans, who hated the Bruins, had to admire his toughness. One commentator said after the fight, "Pound for pound, Stan Jonathan might be the toughest man in hockey." What made Jonathan so scary wasn't just his willingness to fight bigger guys, it was that he usually won. He had incredibly fast hands and knew how to generate power despite his small frame. Players would see him coming and think they had an easy fight, but they were wrong every single time. When you combine that with his fearless attitude, constant aggression, and refusal to ever back down, Stan was one of the baddest little men to ever lace them up. Size didn't matter when you had the kind of heart and fighting ability that Little Chief brought to the rink every single night. And this next guy didn't just fight, he also happens to be the most penalized player in NHL history. Tiger Williams. During his career, Tiger Williams racked up 3966 penalty minutes. And nobody in hockey history has come close to that number. At 5'11" and 190 pounds, Tiger wasn't the biggest guy on the ice, but he moved like a wild animal and hit like a freight train. His combination of speed, toughness, and pure meanness was unmatched, and nobody could stop Tiger when he decided it was time to throw hands. One former player who faced Williams said, "The morning after you played against Tiger, it always felt like you were in a car accident. You were sore from head to toe, and you had bruises you didn't even remember getting." Tiger didn't just fight during the game, he made sure you remembered him long after the final buzzer. He would hit you, slash you, punch you, and talk trash the entire time. Playing against Tiger Williams was exhausting because he never took a shift off. Another player described the fear factor. You're looking at him coming full speed at you, and the fear that you get is, am I really going to step up and take this hit? Because Tiger's going to make it hurt. Williams played for multiple teams during his career, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, Vancouver Canucks, and Los Angeles Kings. No matter what jersey he wore, Tiger brought the same level of violence and intensity every single night. What made Tiger truly dangerous was that he wasn't just a fighter, he could actually play hockey. He scored 241 goals in his career, which means he was a legitimate threat on the ice beyond just his fists. You couldn't ignore him or stick him on the fourth line and forget about him. Tiger was everywhere. and he was always looking for someone to hit or fight. He led the league in penalty minutes twice and was consistently in the top 5 throughout the 1970s. Tiger's style was relentless and exhausting for opponents. He would cross-check you in the corner, slash your ankles behind the play, and then drop the gloves if you tried to retaliate. He wasn't there to play by the rules. He was there to bend and break them as much as possible. One coach said about Williams, "He plays like every game is his last. He's not worried about tomorrow or his body or anything else. He just wants to destroy you today." The nickname Tiger fit him perfectly because he hunted opponents like prey. He stalked them around the ice, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when he did strike, it was violent and memorable. Williams wasn't the most skilled fighter technically, but what he lacked in technique, he made up for in pure aggression and the willingness to fight anyone at any time. Size didn't matter, reputation didn't matter. If you crossed Tiger Williams, you were getting punched in the face. And when it comes to Tiger Williams' teammate in Vancouver, it's safe to say he had a mean streak as well. Dennis Polonich. Dennis Polonich was listed at 5'6" and 165 pounds, but don't let those numbers fool you. This guy was athletic, extremely physical, and wasn't backing down from anybody. Polonich played most of his career with the Detroit Red Wings, and his list of fights and on-ice incidents is extremely long, starting with his rookie season when he challenged the toughest guys in the league just to prove he belonged. In 1976, Polonich got into a brutal fight with Dave Schultz himself during a game between Detroit and Philadelphia. Most players avoided Schultz at all costs, but not Dennis. He dropped the gloves and went toe-to-toe with the hammer, landing several solid punches before the linesman finally broke it up. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. This tiny Red Wings forward was actually winning rounds against the most feared enforcer in hockey. Later that same season, Dennis wanted to fight his own teammate in practice after a disagreement over a drill. His teammates had to physically restrain him from going after a guy who was supposed to be on his side. But Polonich's career was nearly ended by one of the most violent incidents in NHL history. In 1978, during a game against the Colorado Rockies, Wilf Payment slashed Polonich across the face with his stick, breaking his nose in 3 places and fracturing his cheekbone. The attack was so vicious that Dennis needed extensive facial surgery and missed significant time. But here's the scary part. When Polonich came back from that injury, he was even more aggressive and violent than before. He didn't learn to protect himself better or play safer. Instead, he came back angrier and looking for revenge. In 1979, Polonich got into a fight with a Rangers player and ended up kicking him while they were both on the ice. The league suspended him for the dangerous play, but Dennis didn't care about suspensions or fines. In 1980, he attacked a referee during an argument over a penalty call, grabbing the official by his jersey and screaming in his face. That incident earned him one of the longest suspensions of his career, but even that didn't calm him down. What made Dennis Polonich truly terrifying was his complete lack of fear and his willingness to fight guys twice his size. He had a short fuse and an unpredictable temper. You never knew when he was going to snap and come after you. When you combine that with all the fighting, cursing, and constant aggression, Dennis was one of the nastiest little men to ever play in the NHL. Size meant nothing when you had that kind of rage inside you, but how about being one of the craziest? Steve Durbano. Steve Durbano served suspensions in multiple leagues for some of the most gruesome incidents in hockey history, but those were just a few of his many incidents on the ice. From the moment he arrived in the NHL in 1972 until his career ended in the late 1970s, Durbano was one of the most physical and aggressive defensemen that nobody wanted to play against. He bounced around from team to team, playing for the St. Louis Blues, Pittsburgh Penguins, Kansas City Scouts, and Birmingham Bulls in the WHA, because no team could handle him for too long. In 1973, when Durbano was with Pittsburgh, he got into a fight with Dennis Hextall of the Minnesota North Stars, and ended up breaking Hextall's jaw with a vicious elbow. But beyond being a tough defenseman who could hit like a truck, Steve instilled fear in opponents because he was absolutely out of control. Durbano had serious substance abuse problems during his playing days, and he would often show up to games drunk or high. He admitted later in life that he played many games while intoxicated, which made him even more dangerous and unpredictable on the ice. In 1975, he nearly fought the entire Boston Bruins bench after a game got out of hand. Durbano skated over to their bench during a stoppage in play and started challenging everyone, daring any of them to come out and fight him. That same year, in a game against the Philadelphia Flyers, he got so mad at a penalty call that he threw his stick at the referee and had to be escorted off the ice by security. You'd think he'd calm down after serving multiple suspensions, but Durbano just continued his violent ways. In 1976, while playing in the WHA, he attacked an opposing player with his stick during a fight, hitting him in the head repeatedly until other players pulled him away. The incident was so bad that even his own teammates were shocked by what they witnessed. One teammate said, "Steve had no off switch. When he got mad, he would just keep going until someone stopped him or he got tired." In 1977, Durbano had another off-ice incident when he got arrested for assault after a bar fight. He spent time in jail and had to deal with legal problems on top of his hockey suspensions. But despite all the warnings, all the suspensions, and all the second chances, his old habits remained. He was kicked out of the WHA in 1979 after another violent incident, effectively ending his professional hockey career. What made Steve Durbano the dirtiest and scariest player of the 1970s wasn't just his fighting, it was that you never knew what version of him you were getting. He could be playing normal one shift and then completely lose his mind the next. He was unpredictable, dangerous, and willing to cross any line to hurt someone. A few years before Durbano started terrorizing the league, one particular enforcer was more terrifying than anybody, John Ferguson. John Ferguson. Ferguson came into the NHL in 1963 with the Montreal Canadiens, and he quickly gained a reputation for being the ultimate enforcer. When you needed a hard hit, Ferguson was there. When a fight broke out between players, Fergie was right in the middle of it. He set the template for what an enforcer should be, and every tough guy who came after him tried to copy his style. In 1965, he squared up against Ted Green of the Boston Bruins, another tough guy who could easily be on this list. The two went at it for what felt like forever, throwing haymakers and neither one backing down. In the 1968 playoffs, Ferguson and Terry Harper got tangled up with the Bruins, and Fergie tossed one of their players into the board so hard that the glass almost shattered. Didn't matter that it was the playoffs, and every game mattered. Ferguson was going to send a message no matter what the situation was. During the 1969 playoffs, Ferguson got into a brutal fight with Forbes Kennedy of the Philadelphia Flyers. Kennedy was known as a tough customer himself, but Ferguson beat him so badly that Kennedy needed help getting off the ice. The next season, these two met again during a regular season game, and Ferguson didn't hesitate to drop the gloves and finish what they started. In 1970, Ferguson punched Keith Magnuson of the Chicago Blackhawks after a dispute during a game at the Montreal Forum. Ferguson didn't even wait for the puck to drop. He just skated up to Magnuson and started throwing punches. But maybe the biggest statement Ferguson ever made was protecting his teammates at all costs. If you touched Jean Béliveau, Henri Richard, or any of the Canadiens' star players, you had to answer to Fergie. He was like their personal bodyguard, and he took that job very seriously. One opponent said playing against Montreal was scary because you knew if you made one wrong move, Ferguson was coming for you, and nobody wanted that smoke. However, Ferguson wasn't all brute and no skill. He scored 145 goals in his career and won 5 Stanley Cups with Montreal. He was a legitimate power forward who could score goals and set up plays, but his real value was the fear he put into opponents. Teams were afraid to play physical against the Canadiens because they knew Ferguson would make them pay for it. John Ferguson retired in 1971, but his legacy lived on throughout the entire 1970s. Every enforcer who came after him, Schultz, Williams, O'Reilly, all learned from watching Ferguson. He showed them how to protect teammates, how to intimidate opponents, and how to fight with purpose. Without Ferguson, the role of the enforcer might not even exist. He was the original tough guy, and he set the standard that everyone else tried to reach. When he was a young player trying to make it in hockey, one enforcer learned everything from watching Ferguson's style and brought that same intensity to the ice. Terry O'Reilly. Terry O'Reilly attended John Ferguson's hockey camps as a teenager, and Ferguson taught him the importance of toughness and protecting your teammates. And O'Reilly took those lessons to heart. At 6'1" and 200 pounds, Terry was actually one of the smaller power forwards in the league, but they called him Taz for a reason. See, O'Reilly was a fitness fanatic who never stopped working, never stopped hitting, and never stopped fighting. He played every shift like it was the Stanley Cup Finals. Due to his relentless playing style, wild hair, and mean streak on the ice, nobody was messing with him. And it didn't end well for the ones who tried. Terry played his entire career with the Boston Bruins from 1971 to 1985, and he became the heart and soul of those big bad Bruins teams. If you wanted to take a run at Bobby Orr or Phil Esposito, you had to go through O'Reilly first, and that was not a fun experience. In 1976, O'Reilly got into one of the most famous fights in hockey history against Jimmy Mann of the Winnipeg Jets during a preseason game. The fight went on for over a minute with both guys throwing punch after punch and neither one backing down. The crowd was going absolutely insane watching these two warriors beat the hell out of each other. Even after the linesman tried to break it up, O'Reilly wanted to keep going. That was just who he was. He never knew when to quit. In 1977, during a playoff game against the Philadelphia Flyers, Terry fought multiple guys in the same game. He dropped the gloves with Bob Kelly in the first period, fought Dave Schultz in the second period, and then went after Don Selesky in the third period. 3 fights in one playoff game against the toughest team in hockey. Most players would be exhausted after one fight, but O'Reilly kept coming back for more. But O'Reilly wasn't just a fighter. He could actually play the game at a high level. He scored 204 goals and 402 assists in his career, which are legitimate offensive numbers. He made the All-Star team twice and was one of the most complete power forwards of his era. What made Terry special was that he combined skill with toughness. You couldn't just throw him on the ice to fight and then sit him down. He played big minutes, killed penalties, played on the power play, and was always out there in crucial moments. What made Terry O'Reilly truly scary was his motor. He just never stopped. From the first shift of the game to the last, Taz was hitting, grinding, fighting, and doing whatever it took to win. One opponent said, playing against O'Reilly was exhausting. He was like a tornado that just kept spinning and destroying everything in his path. Nobody had an easy night against Terry O'Reilly. Honorable mention goes to his teammate on those Bruins teams, a guy who played with the same intensity and toughness, Andre Moose Dupont. Andre Dupont couldn't control his anger and played like a ticking time bomb on defense. Moose was a walking penalty. And while he didn't lead the league in penalty minutes like some others, his reputation for delivering brutal hits and fighting anyone made him one of the most feared defensemen of the 1970s. He spent most of his career with the Philadelphia Flyers as a key member of the Broad Street Bullies, winning 2 Stanley Cups in 1974 and 1975. But 2 players from Boston are not the scariest enforcers of the 1970s. That title belongs to Dave Schultz's partners in crime on those Flyers teams, Bob Battleship Kelly and Bob Hound Dog Kelly. There wasn't an NHL player in the 1970s who wasn't punched, elbowed, or shoved into the boards by Philadelphia's enforcers. They had a reputation for being the dirtiest, toughest team ever. And these 2 Kellys were right in the middle of every brawl. While Battleship Kelly was setting bone-crushing hits and throwing punches at anyone who dared challenge the Flyers, Hound Dog Kelly was patrolling the ice like a security guard looking for trouble. Battleship Kelly once said about his playing style, "Me, I like to play physical. I like to hit people and make them think twice about coming into our zone." And that's basically been my job my whole career. And he did that job extremely well, racking up over 1,000 penalty minutes during the 1970s. But Hound Dog Kelly was even more vicious with his fighting style. He had incredibly fast hands and could land 5 punches before most guys threw one. In 1974, during the Stanley Cup Finals against the Boston Bruins, Hound Dog got into a massive brawl with Wayne Cashman. The 2 dropped gloves at center ice and just started wailing on each other while the crowd went crazy. Kelly landed several clean shots that had Cashman's head snapping back, but Cashman wouldn't go down. The fight went on for nearly 2 minutes before the officials finally stepped in. What made these 2 Kellys so dangerous was that they fed off each other's energy. When one of them got into a fight, the other one was right there ready to jump in if needed. They were like a 2-man wrecking crew, and opposing teams had to keep their heads on a swivel whenever the Kellys were on the ice. One player said, "Playing in Philadelphia was terrifying. You had Schultz, both Kellys and Dupont all waiting to destroy you. One mistake and you were getting punched or hit so hard you'd see stars." The Broad Street Bullies changed hockey forever, and these enforcers were the enforcers who made that nickname a reality. They bullied teams into submission, and most opponents were beaten mentally before the puck even dropped. And the final part of the Broad Street Bullies enforcer crew played the nastiest of them all. Bryan Bugsy Watson. Playing with unlimited energy and a mean streak a mile wide, Bryan Watson would get in opponents' faces, slash them when the ref wasn't looking, annoy them with constant trash talk, and not let them breathe for a single second. Watson played for multiple teams during the 1970s, including the Pittsburgh Penguins, Detroit Red Wings, and Washington Capitals. But no matter what jersey he wore, his reputation followed him everywhere. One commentator described Watson's style perfectly. What I'm seeing with Bugsy, the battle between him and whoever he's guarding, they're fighting, pushing, shoving, giving it everything they got for 60 minutes straight. That was Watson's game. He wasn't the biggest guy at 5'9" and 175 pounds, but he played like he was 6'5" and 250 pounds. He would hook you, hold you, cross-check you in the back, and then smile at you when the referee wasn't looking. In 1971, Watson got into a heated fight with Phil Esposito of the Boston Bruins. Esposito was one of the best scorers in the league and didn't fight very often, but Bugsy pushed him so far over the edge that Esposito finally snapped and dropped the gloves. Watson took a beating in that fight, but he didn't care. He had successfully gotten inside Esposito's head and taken him off his game for the rest of the night. In 1974, during a game against the Philadelphia Flyers, Watson got into it with Dave Schultz. Now, most players avoided Schultz at all costs, but not Bugsy. He was chirping at Schultz all game long, slashing him, poking him, doing everything possible to get under his skin. Eventually, Schultz had enough and dropped the gloves. But Watson held his own and even landed a few good punches before the linesman broke it up. After the fight, Watson skated to the penalty box with a huge smile on his face, knowing he had done his job. What made Bryan Watson so irritating and difficult to play against was his intelligence. He knew exactly how to bend the rules without breaking them completely. He understood where the referees were positioned on the ice and would deliver cheap shots when they couldn't see. He was a master at getting away with penalties and making opponents lose their cool. One player said about Watson, he was like a mosquito that you couldn't swat away. He'd buzz around you all game, taking little shots here and there, and by the third period, you just wanted to kill him. Watson wasn't the scariest player ever in terms of pure fighting ability, but he was certainly one of the most irritating and mentally exhausting players to compete against. Nobody had an easy night against Bugsy Watson. He would frustrate you, annoy you, cheap shot you, and then fight you if you tried to retaliate. He turned every game into a war of attrition, and this next player was far from the biggest or the strongest, yet nobody wanted to mess with him, not even Dave Schultz. Number 1, Nick Fotiu. Standing at 6'1" and 210 pounds, he may not look like the scariest enforcer ever, but Nick Fotiu was a bad man, and somebody you didn't want to get angry. Fotiu played most of his career with the New York Rangers during the 1970s, and his fists have a long list of NHL faces on their resume. What made Nick special was that he was a native New Yorker who grew up playing street hockey in Staten Island, and he brought that tough blue-collar mentality to the NHL every single night. In 1976, Fotiu landed a couple of devastating haymakers on Clark Gillies of the New York Islanders during a game. Gillies was 6'3", 220 pounds, and one of the toughest players in the league, but Fotiu dropped him with 2 quick punches that had the Madison Square Garden crowd going absolutely insane. In 1977, Nick punched his own teammate in practice after a disagreement over a drill. The teammate was Walt Tkachuk, one of the Rangers' veteran centers and one of Fotiu's good friends on the team, but that didn't matter when Nick's temper flared up. However, if you think Fotiu only went after smaller guys or teammates, think twice. In 1978, he got into a brutal fight with Terry O'Reilly of the Boston Bruins over a hit that Nick thought was dirty. O'Reilly was one of the toughest players in the league, but Fotiu went right at him, and the two exchanged heavy punches for over a minute. Neither guy backed down, and both earned the respect of everyone watching. But the highlight of his fighting career happened in 1979, when he destroyed Dave the Hammer Schultz in one of the most one-sided fights of the decade. Schultz had been talking trash about the Rangers all week leading up to the game, and Fotiu took it personally. When they finally dropped the gloves, Nick asked the Rangers equipment manager for his practice jersey so he wouldn't mess up his game jersey with blood. He then skated right up to Schultz at center ice and proceeded to beat him down in front of 18,000 screaming Rangers fans. Fotiu landed punch after punch, and Schultz couldn't defend himself. The Hammer, the most feared enforcer in hockey history, was getting dominated by Nick Fotiu. One witness said, "I've never seen Schultz take a beating like that. Fotiu was hitting him with everything, and Dave couldn't do anything about it." After the fight ended, Fotiu calmly skated to the penalty box, handed his practice jersey to the equipment manager, and put on his regular game jersey like nothing happened. He treated it like just another day at the office. In 1980, after he delivered a hard hit on Bobby Clark of the Philadelphia Flyers, nobody from the Flyers said a thing to Nick. Even the Broad Street Bullies knew better than to mess with him. Clark just got up, skated away, and the game continued. That's the ultimate sign of respect in hockey, when the toughest team in the league won't even challenge you after you hit their captain. And the last, but not least, scary enforcer on this list will always be remembered for his unpredictable violence, and not for his solid two-way play as a defenseman. It's Keith Magnuson, whose career highlight was being one of the most fearless fighters in Chicago Blackhawks history. Magnuson came into the league in 1969 and immediately made a name for himself with his red hair, intense playing style, and willingness to fight anyone at any moment. Keith wasn't the biggest defenseman at 6'0" and 185 pounds, but something would trigger him during games, and he would just snap. In 1970, Magnuson got into a famous fight with John Ferguson of the Montreal Canadiens. Ferguson was the original enforcer and much more experienced, but Keith didn't care. He dropped the gloves and went right at him. After the fight ended, Magnuson still wasn't satisfied and wanted to go again. His teammates had to hold him back, but this wasn't the only time Magnuson lost control. In 1972, he fought Dave Schultz during a game, and then in 1974, Keith got into another brutal fight with Schultz that resulted in both players getting ejected and fined by the league. Magnuson had a personal rivalry with every tough guy in the NHL. And before we finish this off, here's a couple of honorable mentions. Carol Cully Wilson, Gary Howitt, Dennis Hextall, Willie Plett, Jerry Kong Korab, Forbes Kennedy, Wayne Cashman, Clark Gillies, and Paul Holmgren all deserve recognition as well. These guys turned the 1970s into the toughest decade in NHL history. If you think we forgot somebody, let us know in the comments, and check out some of our other videos on the screen now.